Okay guys, hopefully you're watching this video because you noticed that I was not there today for fourth block. I'm sorry about that. My wife and I have to deal with a medical thing related to our son. The problem is I want to make sure that you do understand Pavlov really well and classical conditioning really well, because it's not difficult, but it's one of those things that you just kind of get a knack for it by practice and understanding it. So I want to show you a couple documents to make sure that you understand what you need to be looking at while we're talking about this and what's going to be on the screen while we're doing this. So for example, here I have our notes. We're going to be talking about our notes here in a little bit. Another document that we have is a practice sheet that you should be getting from the sub today. That is something that you're going to want to bring back with you tomorrow, completely filled out. We will go over the answers. It's not a grade, but the practice is really important because it's part of your take-home quiz and a massive part of your test. And the last thing is also a document that you're going to find in my Canvas website. So this Canvas website is a document that you're going to need to have a look at. I will eventually put my video into YouTube and put a link here for it as well. And then also there's a bunch of videos here, such as a video on the basics about Pavlov, some original footage of Pavlov from the late 1800s with his dogs, the crash course video with Hank Green, the first half which covers classical conditioning. There's a clip from Jim classically conditioning Dwight. The answers are down below. In this document, you can find the answers to the classical conditioning. There's a college student who's classically conditioning his roommate. I have the YouTube link for that, as well as the answers. And then John Watson, which is the very end of the classical conditioning notes, is also, I give the answers at the end of towards the end of this document. So what you're also going to see here is a picture of stuff that you should see on the wall. You should also see a second picture of stuff that is also related to the wall. And then a third picture that is also on the wall, if it'll load up here. So those are the three pictures that we'll be looking at. Those should also, like I said, for example, be on the wall. Please take pictures of that. It will not be up there on Thursday. Here's the answers. Like I said, we don't want to talk about them right now, but they are there as well. I also even have a blurb in here about generalization versus discrimination and extinction versus spontaneous recovery, which is not that difficult, but it is important that you do know it. So let's take a look at the notes real fast. So one of the things that I covered real fast on Monday was the idea of what exactly is classical conditioning. So on the board, for example, it said some things like it's called Pavlovian conditioning, it's called respondent conditioning, it's called anticipatory learning, it's called associative learning, it's called predictive learning. Well, what classical conditioning is the idea that you make a connection between two things. You realize that these two things have a relationship. Once you realize these things have a relationship, whether you realize it consciously or unconsciously, if you see one of those things, you assume the second thing's going to come. For example, if you take your dog for a walk, if they see you pick up the leash, they get really excited maybe. Well, the reason why they're getting excited isn't because they care about the leash, but they do understand that, oh my goodness, they're picking up that leash. Oh, that means we're going to likely go for a walk. Now, it doesn't necessarily happen every single time, but it happens with enough reliability that they then can use it as an association or a predictor, and as a result, they start reacting to it. So they think that that leash is going to lead to them going outside. It's no different than if they hear a can opener or they hear the refrigerator door. If it's no different than if they, for example, one of the best examples is an alarm clock. Like if they wake, maybe when you get up in the morning because of an alarm clock, your dog or cat gets really excited and jumps in bed and tries to wake you up. Well, that's because they're just dying for you to pay attention to them, but you've been sleeping. But as soon as they hear that alarm clock, they don't care about the alarm clock. They don't want attention from it, but it knows what that signifies, because reliably, almost every time that you hear the alarm clock, you also get up. So as soon as they hear the alarm clock, they're excited, because they've made that classical conditioning between A and B, the smoke alarm and you getting up. They've made that connection. Not smoke alarm, your clock, your alarm clock. So as soon as they hear that, they're definitely going to make that connection. Be like, oh my goodness, here we go. I heard what I wanted to hear, which means here comes my person to pet me. Here comes that person to pay attention to me. Remember that conditioning and learning means we're looking for a change in behavior. So a long time ago, they did not realize that the alarm clock had a relationship with you, therefore it didn't do anything. But eventually they started showing learning. They started showing behavior towards the alarm clock. They started showing behavior towards the leash, and they showed behavior towards like a can opener, because they know that it means that something good is coming. So if you look down here, let me give you a little bit of background on Pavlov himself. First of all, he was not a psychologist. He was in anatomy and physiology. The university he worked at, he was actually studying digestion in dogs. He was interested in salivation and digestion and the process of breaking down food. That was where his research was. So he was not a psychologist at all. He did a lot of extensive work on the digestive systems of dogs. He ended up winning the Nobel Prize, I believe, in 1904 for biology and medicine for his work on the digestive tract of dogs. Now today, he's most famous for his work in classical conditioning, but that was not his original intent. And also, he never won the Nobel Prize in psychology for his work, and there's a really simple reason for that. There is no Nobel Prize for psychology, and there never has been. Every once in a while, psychologists win a Nobel Prize, but they do it like in biology, like neurobiology. So people that work on the brain, sometimes they get Nobel Prizes, but that's about as close as you get to a Nobel Prize in psychology. So anyway, so one of the things that Pavlov realized is the same thing we all realize. He noticed that because he had lots of dogs and they got fed on very regular schedules, he noticed that the dogs pretty much started to get excited if anything that even remotely looked like they were about to get fed occurred. So, for example, if the feeder would come into the room, if they would walk near their food dish, if someone would go into the closet that had their bag of food, anything that even remotely indicated that the dog might get fed, the dog started to get excited. So Pavlov noticed that, we noticed that, that's something we take for granted. But what that is classical conditioning. They associated that room with their food, they associated picking up the food dish with getting fed, they associated the feeder coming in the room with the idea that it's about to get fed. Well, what Pavlov decided to test then was, could you make anything be the signal? Like, you're like, well, he didn't teach the dogs to care about the bag of food. He didn't teach them to care about a food dish. He didn't teach them to care about the feeder. That happened naturally. His question was, could he make that happen? Could he take any random thing and make it be a signal for food? And he figured he could, because his assumption was, as long as I attach the word or attach the idea to the food and I keep doing it, they'll eventually figure that out. It's not much different than your dogs or cats learning their name. You could have chosen any name for them, but once you attached a name to them and you started using it, they picked up on that. So he ultimately chose a lot of different sound cues. He never technically used bells, but we're going to use that as an example. He used metronomes, he used whistles, he used tuning forks, and what he felt was that he could use anything, and he could make that connection. So what he decided to do was to just, ring these tuning forks, ring these bells, ring these blow these whistles, and at the beginning the dogs didn't do anything, nor should they have, because they didn't have any meaning to them. So he said, well, I have to attach meaning. So what he wanted to do was attach meaning between the bell and the food, between the whistle and the food, between the tuning fork and the food. So what he would do is he would play the sound right before he gave them food. And he kept doing it over and over and over with extremely reliable consistency to see, could it work? Eventually, they started to salivate to the bell. They started to salivate to the whistle. They started to salivate to the tuning fork. Eventually, he got them to the point where they salivated to the same level of intensity, because he actually measured it. He measured how much saliva they were producing. He got them to the point where they were salivating to the whistle or the tuning fork or the metronome as much as if he was actually showing them food. It basically became such a great predictor of food that it literally was food as far as they were concerned, because it was always a guaranteed shot. So if you look down here, and like I said, please look at your chart as well, especially the one that has the picture. So either please look at the whiteboard or please look at the pictures that are on the other document that I also have on my website. So there's some terms here, and you'll see that I have the terms divided into two categories. I have them divided into the unconditioned and neutral, and then the conditioned. So if you notice on the vocabulary that I gave you, Unconditioned means it's not something you had to learn. It's not something that had to be taught. It's natural. It happens without needing to be learned. Neutral means it doesn't have any value at all. Therefore, that's why there's no such thing as a neutral response, because there is no response. That's why it's neutral. Conditioned means it's something you have to learn. Now, you could do that with anything, like Pavlov proved. You could make anything conditioned. All you have to do is attach something to something they care about. So he could take the bell and attach it to food, or he could take he could take a metronome and attach it to food. And as long as he did that, it would become conditioned. And then notice the word stimulus means anything that can cause a behavior, not the neutral stimulus, but an unconditioned and conditioned stimulus cause a behavior. That behavior is called a response. So if you look at the other chart that I gave you that said like the 3 laws or the 3 rules, one of the rules is that the unconditioned stimulus always causes the unconditioned response. The conditioned stimulus always causes the conditioned response. The neutral stimulus is always the conditioned stimulus, just before and after. And then also the response is always the same action. So whatever action you have, it's the same action both times. The difference is that one is to the unconditioned stimulus and one is to the conditioned stimulus. So, for example, what he did was he didn't have to teach them to care about food. So when he showed them food, it was an unconditioned stimulus. He never had to teach them that food had value. The unconditioned response was they would then salivate to the food. He never had to teach them to salivate to the food. That was a natural response. They couldn't control it even if they wanted to. What used to be neutral was the bell or the whistle or the metronome. Or when your dog was a puppy, the can opener or the leash. Those were neutral. They had no value. But then over time, whether you do it on purpose, like Pavlov did, he intentionally paired the whistles with food. Or if it's by accident, like you didn't mean for your dog to get attached to the leash, it just happened that way. So it could be intentional, it could be accidental. Either way, that bell, that metronome, whatever, slowly went from being neutral to being conditioned. Meaning they were figuring out, wait a minute, that bell seems to predict food. And eventually, once it became a reliable predictor, they started to react to the bell. So what happened was the neutral stimulus bell, or the neutral stimulus metronome, or the neutral stimulus can opener, or whatever, became conditioned. It became a conditioned stimulus. So it is the same thing. It's just after. After they figured out that the bell, or the tone, or the metronome, or the leash, or the whatever means food, then they started to react to it as if it was food. So then, once something becomes a conditioned stimulus, then it can trigger the conditioned response. Remember, the response is the same. At the beginning, they were salivating to food. Now he gets them salivating to a bell. Now, they don't obviously want to eat the bell, but because the bell has become such a great predictor for food, they react to the bell as if it's a guarantee that they will get food, therefore they go ahead and react to it. Now, the ability to become conditioned for a behavior is what he calls acquisition. So acquisition means that a neutral stimulus has become a conditioned stimulus, whether by accident or on purpose. Once the dog is salivating to a bell as if it was food, that is acquisition. Once you have a dog freaking out over a leash, the same way they would be freaking out as if you took them outside, that is acquisition. Once you have a dog freaking out over a can opener as if you had just given them a plate of food, that is acquisition. Now, the other way of describing acquisition, see if you can follow along. The definition of acquisition and how he knew there was acquisition was that if he could get them to cause the conditioned response because he showed them the conditioned stimulus, even if the unconditioned stimulus is not there. So if he can get the CR from the CS without the actual presence of the US or the UCS, that means they had acquired it, they got it, they learned it. That's called acquisition. That's the conditioning. Because think about it, if he rings the bell, but the food is in like the room, he doesn't really know if they're salivating to the bell. They might just be salivating to the food that they can see. So if he can ring the bell, if he can get the bell to the point where he can ring it, there is no indication that food is anywhere in the equation, and they still salivate to that bell anyway, that's acquisition. So if you can get them to react to the conditioned stimulus, you can get the conditioned response out of them, even without the UCS or the US even being in the situation, that's when you know. That's when you know that that is acquisition. Because you're like, listen, it can't be neutral anymore, because the bell produced a response even though there was no food. There was no chance of food. And they didn't even know that there would be food. So that's what he calls that. So, for example, if you look at these scenarios that I gave you here's a couple of examples. Now, number one, if you look at number one, this is actually the Garcia effect. If you remember that from Unit 4, this is the Garcia effect, which is a type of classical conditioning. So you eat a food, and you also get sick because you have the flu. However, you don't like, develop a dislike for the food because you get nauseated by smelling it. So the unconditioned stimulus is having the flu, or being sick with the flu. You can't help that. The unconditioned response is you get nauseated or you get sick because you get the flu. Now, what used to be neutral was the smell of the food. But now the conditioned stimulus has become the smell of the food after this incident. So now the conditioned response is to get sick or nauseous because of the smell of the food. Now think about the equation that's on the whiteboard. The unconditioned response is always due to the unconditioned stimulus. The conditioned response is always due to the conditioned stimulus. The neutral and the conditioned stimulus are always the same thing. And the response is always the same action, just to two different things. So again, the unconditioned response and the conditioned response are both being nauseous, being nauseated. But the unconditioned response is to do it because of the flu. The conditioned response is to be nauseous, but this time it's because of the smell of the food. Again, neutral stimulus and conditioned stimulus. Food. Just before and after this incident of getting the flu. And again, you can see that the CR is due to the CS, and the UCR is due to the UCS. Okay, so, nausea due to the sickness, nausea due to the food smell. Look at number 2. This must be a very old apartment for the fact that it actually still burns people. But in this case, they're jumping back because they're getting burned by hot water. That's painful. Pain is it's an unconditioned stimulus. And then later they're realizing that, no, there's a predictor for this. They're associating it with an incident. So in this case, for number 2, the unconditioned stimulus is the hot water, or being burned by the hot water. And so the unconditioned response is to jump back. Because of the hot water. So what used to be neutral? Well, what used to be neutral was the sound of a toilet flushing. Wouldn't have caused any behavior originally, but then eventually the conditioned stimulus becomes the sound of the toilet flushing now, because now it's going to cause the conditioned response, and that's going to cause that person to jump back. Again, same action, but now because of a different reason. So now they're going to jump back because of the sound of the toilet flushing, because now they have figured out that the toilet flushing is an indicator of what's about to happen with the water temperature, so now they react to the toilet flushing as if they were being burned by hot water. Number 3, an individual receives injections of drugs. It causes them to have a heart increase. Now, by being in the room alone, they get their heart increased as they're waiting to get the drugs, which they haven't even gotten yet. So for number 3, the unconditioned stimulus is the drug, or the injection. There's a lot of ways you can word it. The gist is the injection of the drug. The unconditioned response is their heart rate increasing because of the drug. They can't control that. What used to be neutral was being in that room, but now the room has become the conditioned stimulus. And now it's going to trigger the conditioned response, which is their increased heart rate, but now it's because of the room. Make sure you understand the response always has to be a verb. It always has to be a behavior, and it has to be due to whatever the stimulus is right above it in the scenario. Now, my son, for example, I'll give you an example that my son can relate to. He does not like seeing the dentist. Now, the problem is he now is scared of the dentist. Now, there's nothing wrong with our dentist. He's not a monster. The problem is the last time my son was at the dentist, they had to do something unpleasant in his mouth. So back then, the unconditioned stimulus would have been the pain or the discomfort in his mouth. the unconditioned response would have been him to be afraid or have anxiety because of them being in his mouth. What used to be neutral was the sight of our dentist. Now, the sight of our dentist has become the conditioned stimulus, and so now my son's conditioned response, last time we went to the dentist after that incident, was he was scared and anxious of the dentist. That was the conditioned response. Another situation with him, when he got shots, he actually reacted less to the shots than the actual sight of the nurse who walked into the room. So the unconditioned stimulus was the pain of the shots. The unconditioned response was being upset because of the shots. What used to be neutral was that poor nurse, but now that nurse has become the conditioned stimulus, and the sight of her alone caused him to freak out, and he got upset. And like I said, he got more upset over seeing her than he actually got upset about the actual shot because of that conditioning. Now, look at some of the examples I gave you on this situation here. And again, you can go look up the Jim one. Jim and Dwight, go watch the video, see if you can answer it on your own. Look at the college student who does it to his roommate. It's hilarious. See if you can do that one. So what we're going to do real quick is we want to look at these two here really, really fast. And so if you look at, like, for example, my cat, the one fat cat, Hobbs, he hates strangers. If a stranger comes in the house, he runs and he hides. But he also has figured out that strangers come to the front door. So if someone knocks at the front door or rings the doorbell, he runs and hides. So notice that the unconditioned stimulus is the stranger, and his unconditioned behavior, his response, is to run from the stranger. What used to be neutral a long time ago when he was a kitten was the doorbell or knocking on the door. He didn't have any connection to it yet. But now it has become the conditioned stimulus, and now he hides because he hears the doorbell. Now, I could go ring the doorbell myself, but he would still run and hide because it has predictably been reliable in meaning a stranger. So he assumes it is a stranger, so he runs and hides. Now, my other cat, Iggy, he is an attention whore. He loves attention like crazy. If he hears the garage door sound, he is waiting at the door from the garage to our house into the laundry room. He waits there and he cries. You can hear him crying at the door before we even get into the house. He's already waiting for us to pet him because, like I said, he wants to be petted. Now, I don't even think he knows what the garage door sound is. I don't think he even knows what that weird buzzing sound is in the house. But what he knows is that sound means, ooh, people who are here, like people are here that will pay attention to me. So the unconditioned stimulus is us. He wants us. He wants to see us. So his unconditional response would be to come to running to the door to come see us because he wants to see us. What used to be neutral back when he was a kitten was the garage door sound. He didn't know what it was. But now the garage door sound has become a conditioned stimulus because now he knows to come running at the sound of that garage door sound because he knows that means that's going to likely predict that we are home. And so that's what he does. He comes at the sound of the garage door. It's no different than your dog or cat getting excited at the alarm clock because they think you're going to be up. It's no different than your dog getting excited over the word walk. They don't care about the word walk, but they certainly care about its association with what they want. Same thing with something like the refrigerator door opening. They don't want to eat the refrigerator door, but they do know what it signifies. So they've made that connection. Now, humans do this too. Like I said, I gave examples with my son, but there's plenty of human examples. It's just a lot easier to use animal examples instead. They definitely did this with rats with tones right before an electroshock. They started getting so scared of the tones, it was as if the tones were electrocuting them. Well, that's because the tone became a predictor. So them being shocked was the UCS, and them getting in pain because of it was the UCR. They're freaking out over it was the UCR. What used to be neutral was the tone. But then later, when they heard the tone, it freaked them out because it became conditioned, and the tone caused them to be scared and anxious because they knew they were about to get shocked. And so it was able to produce that behavior. So let's talk about Pavlov Part 2. Again, you can practice the rest of those. Okay, these are for you to practice. I'll come back to these on Thursday. I'll go over all the answers to them on Thursday. If you don't get all of them right, that's fine. Some of them are really hard. Like if you can't get number 9, number 9's pretty hard. If you can't get number 9, I don't feel bad. You don't have to get all of them right. Number 11 is also pretty hard. So if you can't get 9 or 11, that's fine. But some of these are pretty straightforward. Some of them are pretty easy. Like number 15, that's about as basic as it gets. Number 6. Number 6 is another Garcia effect. In this case, you drank a lot, then you got sick, and then that next day you caught a whiff of it. So you drank too much alcohol. So, like, for example, here, you happen to be pounding down what are called screwdrivers. And if you didn't know, vodka and orange juice are called screwdrivers. God bless you. God bless your innocence. But anyway, so that is the idea of a Garcia effect of classical conditioning. Now, one thing about Pavlov, real quick, we need to move on, is the idea of the fact that he also figured out that there's a perfect amount of time. Like, what he found was if you waited a certain amount of time, there were some times where you could learn it faster than others. So, for example, if he waited 5 seconds after he rang the bell to give them food, or 10 seconds before he gave them food, or 30 seconds, or 5 minutes, or 10 minutes, what he found was they would pick it up. But getting it from neutral to conditioned often took longer if you waited longer. So if you wait too long, such as you ring the bell and then wait, and then you give them food, they would eventually learn that the food would, or the bell and the food had a connection, but it took a lot longer than you would want. So, for example, if you wanted to train an animal really fast, what he found was the ideal pair time was half a second. Now, like I said, he did show that after 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, they'd still learn it. Now, he argued that eventually, if you waited too long between the bell and the food, they probably wouldn't make that connection, and he was partly right, but we'll come back to that in a second. So the ideal pairing time is half a second. So one of the things about that is, let's apply that to punishment or reward. If your dog does something good, you should give them the reward right away, because that will be the biggest impression on changing their behavior. If your dog does something bad, you should punish them right away, because the faster you punish them, the more likely they are to make a connection between what they did wrong and what you just punished them for. Think about it. If you wait like an hour or 2 hours or 5 hours before you punish them, the dog probably won't even know what the heck they're being punished for. So you would either need to catch them in the act, or as soon as you know that they've done something wrong, you need to punish them or reward them immediately, whatever good or bad behavior, so that it makes them lasting impression. So what he found was, especially with animals, if you want to convert a neutral stimulus into a conditioned stimulus as fast as possible, you don't want to wait very long. You want to definitely do the unconditioned stimulus and the conditioned stimulus in really quick order. You want to put the condition, you want to ring the bell and then almost immediately give them food. Now, you can't do it at the same time. You can't do that, but you need to have very, very little delay. So less delay, the better. Now, one thing that James Garcia, the one that the Garcia effect is named after, he did show that you actually could make a connection even in animals after several hours, but it has to be something really powerful. So Pavlov was half right, but Garcia was able to he was able to introduce them to sweet water, like sugar water, but the rats didn't like it because they're not hummingbirds, so they don't really want sugar water. But what he found was, if he gave them weird-tasting water, and then many, many hours later, he pumped radioactive air into their cages, and then they got radiation sickness and started throwing up, they didn't obviously know they were being radiated, so they thought it was the water. So if he gave them the sweet water in the future, they would refuse to drink the water. They would basically go thirsty just to avoid the water, even though it was several hours between the water and the vomiting. They made that connection. Now, something like a bell and vomiting, probably not after 4, 5, 6 hours, but definitely something memorable like beer-tasting water, they remember that. Now, the second thing here, if you can get Pavlov Part 1, then Pavlov Part 2 is much easier. So, these two terms go together. Extinction and spontaneous recovery go together, and generalization and discrimination go together. So, the word extinction, we're not talking about dinosaur extinction, but we do mean, instead of animals going dead, we do mean behaviors going dead. So, if you have a behavior that went from a neutral to a conditioned stimulus, such as he got the dog salivating to the bell, you can just as easily get them to stop salivating to the bell. All you have to do is keep ringing the bell, never give them food ever again. Eventually the bell slowly goes back to being neutral. Now, they didn't forget the bell. That's why this isn't about memory, it's about behavior. They didn't forget the bell, but because now the bell no longer has any value again, they stopped reacting to the bell. And their saliva would literally dry up, and they would not react to the bell. That's called extinction. So the definition of extinction is a behavior that goes away. And so what Pavlov showed was any behavior that I can condition into them, I can also extinct it right back to the way it was. He can go back to being neutral if he wanted it to. Number two, however, Pavlov also showed that, let's say that we do that. Let's say we take a bell, we get them to salivate to it because of its connection to food. Then we go ahead and go back to making it neutral, and we make extinction. What he found was, let's say I ring the bell and I give them food again. Well, what's going to happen is they're going to pick up the salivation much faster because they never forgot. They never forgot the bell meant food at one point. They just aren't doing it now because it hasn't been about food. But if he reintroduces food back with the bell and the food back together again, they will go back to salivating much faster. That's called spontaneous recovery. Now let me give you an example with a dog with fetching. So let's say you have a dog and you pretend to throw the ball for fetching. Now, if you keep faking it over and over again, unless your dog is dumb, some of you guys maybe have a dog that will just keep going for a ball that isn't even out there. But let's say you keep faking like a throw. Eventually the dog will go from chasing it to just standing there to not even flinching at all. Because it's like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. It's like the boy cried wolf. I'm not falling for it anymore. So the behavior has gone extinct. You've stopped their fetching behavior. But then, let's say you throw the ball the next time, after you've gotten their behavior gone. Then they'll go chase the ball. So there's spontaneous recovery. Then the very next time you pretend to throw the ball, they'll probably go after it again. There's that spontaneous recovery. You brought it back. So Pavlov was able to add a behavior and then lose the behavior. He was able to add the behavior and then he was able to lose the behavior. Okay, if you picked up the leash over and over and over again and just never took them for a walk and just kept teasing them with the leash, they would eventually stop getting excited about the leash. So that's extinction. Then if you decided to take them for a walk on the leash, bam, they're back to spontaneous recovery. If you stop feeding them table scraps, they stop getting excited at dinner. Then if you reintroduce table scraps, then bam, suddenly they're excited for dinner again. So you can extinct and spontaneously recover behavior anytime you want. Now the other two terms, generalization. Generalization, to generalize something means to look at everything broadly or to look at everything equally, make a very overbroad statement. And then if you look at the word discrimination, we're not talking about the type of discrimination that's going to come up in Unit 12 with racial discrimination and ethnic discrimination. But it does mean the same thing in this case about treating things differently. Not the negative social kind, but it does mean treating things differently. So generalization, a true story. Pavlov lost one of his metronomes, lost one of his whistles. I can't remember what it was, but he lost one of his items that he was using for the dogs. So he had his assistant go out and get another one. When they played the new one, they discovered that it was a very different sound. It was the same kind of device, but it was a different sound. Pavlov did not expect the dog to salivate, but he did. So then Pavlov messed around with this, and what he found was if the stimulus, a new stimulus that seemingly is like the old stimulus, the dogs will react to it just the same anyway. That's called generalization. So, for example, if he gave them a different bell or a different whistle, they would salivate to that one anyway, even though they had never learned it, simply because it was close enough to the original. If you change, let's say you had to throw away the leash and you bought a brand new leash that was a different color, I don't think the dog would get less excited. That's generalizing. He taught the dogs to salivate to circles, then they salivated to ovals. That's generalizing. If you went to a foreign country and you don't know the language, but you see an 8-sided red octagon on a street sign, you're probably going to stop. Well, that's because you generalize, because it's close enough to an American stop sign. You assume it probably means the same thing. That's generalizing. If you got a new can opener or a new refrigerator, I don't think the dog is going to stop reacting to it, even though it's not exactly the same exact sound. It's close enough. I think they'll generalize to it. So that's called generalization. However, sometimes discrimination occurs either on its own or you could do it on purpose. So what Pavlov did was, he trained them on circles and then they would salivate to ovals. But what he did was he then forced them to discriminate. He would show them circles and give them food. He would show them ovals and he never gave them food. So the circles kept becoming conditioned. The ovals went back to being neutral. There, he just caused them to discriminate. They tried to generalize. He discriminated them, on them. And he used discrimination on them. So, if you want to, you could do this. For example, I bet your dogs do this naturally. Like when your dog wants to go for a walk, if they always go out the same door, then they discriminate between the doors. They always go to the same one, and they don't look at the other doors. If you're the only person in the family that gives them table scraps, then when everyone's having a meal, they discriminate among your family members. They only come to you. They ignore your family members. If you're the one who takes them for a walk, and none of the other family members do, they discriminate by paying attention to you when they want to go for a walk or go outside, and they pay attention to nobody else. So they are discriminating. So discriminating has a lot to do with just treating things differently. Like I said, Pavlov could do this on purpose, where he could, ring 2 different bells, keep reinforcing the one, never give them food for the other one. One stayed conditioned, the other went back to being neutral. Bam, discrimination. Like I said, your dogs could do this on their own. They could discriminate between your family members on who does what. So this is much, much easier than the original Pavlov stuff. Now, Garcia and Poling, the key word here is what's called salient. Salient means obvious. So what he found was the more obvious the connection, animals are more likely to make that connection. So if you give them several things that could be the reason why a behavior or an incident has occurred, they're more likely to go to the most likely scenario. And humans do this, but even animals can do this. So for example, with rats, these poor rats, they were sometimes exposed at random to sweet tasting water. They were sometimes randomly exposed to a tone. Later in the day, they were randomly exposed to either electroshock or radiation poisoning. Now, it was completely randomized, so there really was no rhyme or reason to when the water or the noise or the shock or the radiation sickness would occur. But over time, what they saw were the rats started to think that they knew what meant what. So, for example, when they heard the tone, they scrambled off of the floor to safety because they were scared to death of getting shocked. When the sweet water appeared, they didn't run up the walls because they were not scared of getting shocked because they didn't think the water had anything to do with shocked. But they did think the tones did. So they started to discriminate and learn, and that's called saliency, or salient, how obvious something is. Now, let me give you a human example. Let's say you have a relatively normal day. You wake up that morning, you brush your teeth, you get dressed, you have breakfast. Same place or same kind of breakfast you get every day on the way to school. Then, you fail a quiz in first block, you ace a test second block, you get into a heated argument with your friend at lunch, you go to the same place you always go for lunch, you come home, you do stuff around the house, play video games, watch TV, do homework, and then your parents are like, hey, let's go to this new restaurant that just opened up for dinner. You go there for the very first time, you come home, you do some more things, you go to bed. 3 o'clock in the morning, you wake up and you're feeling violently ill. And then you vomit, like, over and over again all night long. Now, as you're running through your day, which one are you going to be shaking your fist in anger and saying, oh, you? Well, I doubt it's going to be breakfast, although, who knows? Maybe your breakfast was undercooked and they got salmonella poisoning from your eggs. Or maybe at lunch, your Chick-fil-A had an undercooked piece of chicken and it got you food poisoning. Maybe you just have random flu. Maybe you just caught a flu bug for no apparent reason. But the most likely thing you're going to be shaking your fist at is at that new restaurant your parents told you to try, because it's salient. It's the most obvious answer. So humans do it, animals do it. If you have a kid who gets sick, the day after they get a booster shot, everything else that you could think of, you're going to probably eliminate them and say, oh no, it's definitely because of the shot. And you might be right, but the point is, it was the most obvious answer, therefore that's what you assumed. Now, Rescorla, let's not worry too much about Robert Rescorla's work. One of the things he pointed out was, and let me just give you one quick example. He pointed out with Pavlov's work, it isn't just about frequency of pairing, it has to be reliable. So let's say Pavlov in a given day rang the bell 1,000 times. And he gave the dogs food 50 of the times he rang the bell 1,000 times. Now, the dog getting food 50 times a day is pretty powerful. But the problem is, they're only getting it 50 times out of 1,000 rings. That is not likely to really get the dog to make a really strong connection to the food, not because they're not getting food a lot with the bell, they're not getting it reliably and consistently. So what Robert Rescorla pointed out as part of his own research, which we're not really going to go into any detail on, is the fact that it isn't just that he does it frequently. Like I said, Pavlov could give them food 50 times after bells, which would be fine if he was ringing it 50 times. But if he's ringing the bell 1,000 times and he gives them food 50 times, that connection isn't consistent enough. It's not reliable enough to be a good predictor. Therefore, the dogs aren't likely to make the connection. So Roscorla pointed out it's not just frequency, it's also reliability. It has to be consistent. Here is the taste aversion. That is the Garcia effect. So that's exactly what the Garcia effect is. Taste aversion is to have an aversion to something is a disgust or a dislike for something. So taste aversion is not liking foods for a variety of reasons. That's called the Garcia effect. Garcia effect is an example of classical conditioning. Here's a real life example. There were wolves that were killing sheep herders' sheep on farms out in the western United States, like Wyoming, Idaho, Dakota, stuff like that. So they wanted to kill these wolves because they were eating their sheep, which were obviously killing their profits because they were sheep ranchers. The problem was these wolves were an endangered species, and the government told them they couldn't kill the wolves. But the sheep herders were like, well, I can't have them killing my sheep because I got to survive. I got to live off of this income. So what they eventually did was they baited traps with sheep meat that had a poison in it. Now the poison wasn't enough to kill the wolves, but it definitely made them kind of sick, like pretty sick. And so what they found was that just by laying out sheep meat, and then the wolves eating the sheep meat and then getting sick because of it, the wolves made a connection between, well, the sheep meat must be the stuff that's making us sick, and then the wolves started to avoid their real life living sheep as well. Not just the sheep meat, they were avoiding the sheep, the actual sheep. So they were able to use taste aversion to save an endangered wolf without having to kill the wolves and protect the flock. Now, an example that they did with humans, because notice here it says taste aversion, that's not always because of taste. So they asked people on a scale of 1 to 10 how much you like fudge. They only picked people that rated it like as a 10, like people who really, really love fudge. So they said, well, good, because we're going to give you the opportunity to eat all the fudge you want. So then they gave people the opportunity to eat as much fudge as they wanted. The problem was most of the people didn't really want to eat the fudge. Some people did, but most people did not want to eat the fudge. Now, there wasn't anything wrong with the fudge. The people who ate it, or if they had eaten it, would have reported that, yeah, the fudge was perfectly fine. It was perfectly normal fudge. But they did something that made people not really want to like the fudge. Now, there's a lot of people I've had over the years who guess what it is. Well, I'll just go ahead and give the answer since I'm not here. They made the fudge, they melted it down, and then they reshaped it to look like dog poop. They shaped it to look like dog poop. Most people could not stand the thought of picking up something that they enjoyed, but they couldn't bear the thought of picking up something that looked like they were picking up dog crap and then putting it into their mouth. Therefore, they didn't really want fudge anymore. So how do you use taste aversion for your enemies? Well, if you have an ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend that ruined your heart, like they broke your heart, if there's something that they love, find something that they hate, pair it with something they love, and you can ruin their things that they love. Okay? If there's something they really particularly hate, and you know there's something that they really love and cherish, attach that thing that they hate with that thing that they love, you'll probably cause a Garcia effect-like phenomenon against whatever it is they like through classical conditioning. Alright, let's talk about baby Albert. Now, on this video here, on this one here, please, I strongly recommend you go to the YouTube video. It's original footage of John Watson, not John Watson, Sherlock Holmes' assistant, but real-life American psychologist John Watson. This is original. Like I said, please check out all of these. But this is some original footage, so you can see what he did to little baby Albert, which was terrible. Anyway, the key word here was tabula rasa. Now, tabula rasa is a Latin term. It literally translated into empty table, but we don't call it empty table in English. We call it clean slate or empty slate or blank slate. So the idea with tabula rasa is that, like, it's fresh. There's very little that's there. So what John Watson argued was kids learn their positive and negative feeling towards things through experience. He pointed out and he suggested that babies are pretty much neutral of almost everything when they're born. Other than things like really bright lights or really, really loud sounds or obviously needles or something like that, it's like babies are completely neutral to pretty much everything. And then he proved this. One of the ways he proved it, and little baby Albert was his most famous baby. He used lots and lots of babies. He didn't particularly like babies. That's why he probably did such cool experiments with them. But anyway, baby Albert is his most famous baby, mostly because he got filmed a lot. But, so little baby Albert, he proves tabula rasa because what he does, and you'll see it in the video if you watch it on YouTube, is, he exposes him to a whole bunch of new ideas the baby's never encountered before. Well, the baby doesn't have any positive or negative feelings about those things. He doesn't show fear or excitement. He just shows curiousness. Over and over again, just curiousness. So, for example, he shows him a rat, and baby Albert is curious. He's not scared. He's not excited. Some of you would be scared to death if I put a rat in your lap. He could have put a snake in his lap, or in front of him. He did put burning newspaper in front of him. And you'll see in the video, baby Albert tried to touch it. Now, he didn't let him touch it, but the fact that he's not even scared of the fire is because he doesn't know that fire is bad, or to touch fire is bad. So, baby Albert doesn't know. Like, you could have put millions of dollars in front of baby Albert, and he wouldn't be excited, because he doesn't know that some things are good or some things are bad. He could put poison in front of him. He could have put a gun in front of him. Little baby Albert was not scared of any of these things. He was not excited by any of these things. He was just curious about them. That's called tabula rasa. There's your clean slate. Then, what he wants to do is he wants to prove that, here's how conditioning happens. Now, it could be classical, operant, or observational conditioning, but he happens to choose classical conditioning as his connection. So what he's going to do, and I'll go ahead and show it to you, excuse me, not this. I got to get the other document. So, what he's going to do is he's actually going to go ahead and show that little baby Albert is scared of whatever he wants him to be scared of. So John Watson's experiment, what he does is he gives little baby Albert the white rat, and again, the baby is not upset about it. He's curious about it. But then what he's going to do is he's going to play a really loud gong. This scares the crap out of baby Albert. He cries a lot. And they keep putting the rat in front of him over and over again and playing the gong, and then the rat, and then the gong, rat and the gong, rat and the gong, over and over and over again. So the loud gong becomes the unconditioned stimulus because it causes the baby to cry, little baby Albert to cry. But then the rat, before, remember, the rat was tabula rasa, he was neutral about it. But then after pairing with the loud gong, the baby becomes scared of the rat. Deathly afraid of the rat, and then he cries at the sight of the rat. So he just classically conditioned to be scared of a rat. He could have done the opposite, like he could have put a gun or fire in front of baby Albert and then gave him candy. Baby Albert would have then been classically conditioned to love fire. That kid could have grown up to be quite the arsonist firebug, or quite the dangerous person with a gun. But he just chose this. Later, he also showed him a rabbit and like a fur coat and some other things, and baby Albert was scared to death of those as well. There's your generalization. He was scared of the rabbit because it was close enough to the rat. It scared him, so there's generalization. I mean, he made the poor baby afraid of a rabbit, for goodness sake. The biggest, and like I said, he could have done something like he could have given him a gun and given him candy, or he could have made, given him the gun and then made the loud gong and then have him scared of guns, or make him love guns if he gave him candy or something. Now, the worst part about all of this was it for little baby Albert. He didn't send him home. He never turned him back. Now, over time, extinction would have occurred. It's not like, baby Albert would be a 40-year-old man who would see a woman in a fur coat walking down the street, and then he'd crawl into the fetal position and cry his eyes out. Eventually, think about it, over time, he would keep encountering furry things in the future, and then he'd be anxious, but then nothing bad would happen. And then nothing bad would happen. Nothing bad would happen. So eventually, he would become neutral again to the rat over time, over the furry things over time. But what John Watson could have done is what's called counter-conditioning. John Watson, after he made him scared of the rat, could have then shown him the rat and then given him candy or sang to him or gave him a hug or something. And then slowly but surely, he would have actually had a positive feeling towards the rat. That's called counter-conditioning. But he didn't do that. He just left him to leave. But eventually, like I said, baby Albert would have gotten over his fear of furry things, or at least for the most part, because over time, extinction would have kicked in because nothing bad would have happened. Now, for the longest time, they didn't ever know what happened to little baby Albert, but then they eventually were able to discover, they found his real name, and they discovered that, unfortunately, he actually died, I believe, at the age of 5 or 6, but this was back in the 1920s, when child mortality rates were extremely high. So I don't remember what he died of, but he died at about, I think, the age of 5 or so. So it's very, very sad. But it had nothing to do with the like John Watson experiment. That has nothing to do with why he died. It's just a sad ending to little baby Albert. So, by the way, I gave you an example of the Garcia effect as well, if you want an example of that. So, anyway, I believe that covers everything. Now, again, like I said, you should practice these. I should have students. This is important. Hopefully some students from last semester, and maybe even last year, or even from earlier in the day, hopefully some of them have shown up. They're there to help you. Pavlov is really easy, I think, if you understand what you're doing. It's also like 20% of your Unit 5 test, so this is something you need to understand. So please practice these in class with all the time that you have remaining. Please take a look at these. Please look at these videos. Please check these out. Please make sure that you understand what's on the whiteboard. Please make sure you take pictures of these things. They will not be up there on Thursday. And please make sure you look at these as well. So last things, and then I'm done. Biological preparedness. John Watson just pointed out that some things are easier to instill fear of than others. So for example, being scared of snakes is an easier fear than being scared of a bunny. Now, he was able to get little baby Albert scared of a bunny, but he also pointed out that some fears are more natural and wouldn't take nearly as much work. So, for example, heights, falling from a great height and dying is a problem. Being scared of the dark, being scared of a poisonous or a possibly venomous animal like a snake or a spider, yeah, that's going to be more likely to be instilled in a human with less effort than something like being scared of bunnies or a fur coat. So that's called biological preparedness. And this here, these are 3 types of classical conditioning techniques that are not considered to be very effective. So trace conditioning would be you ring the bell and you wait a really long time before you give them food. Now, again, Garcia and others have proven this is possible, but it's not very good. Remember, half a second or as close as you can is good between the unconditioned and conditioned stimulus, or neutral stimulus. You have to pair them together rather quickly. So trace conditioning can work, but it's not effective. Simultaneous conditioning, that would be ringing the bell and giving them the food at the same time. That will not work because they're not going to there has to be a little bit of delay. Otherwise, it's like instead of cause and effect, it's cause effect. Well, cause effect makes no sense. So it has to be cause and effect. Otherwise, they're not going to pay attention to the bell because they're already getting the food at the same time. And then backward conditioning is exactly what it sounds like. Backward conditioning would be giving them the food and then ringing the bell. Animals aren't likely to pick that up at all. Humans, we could pick that up, but it still wouldn't be very meaningful because why would you care about a bell after you already got the food? That makes no sense. So that would be like, asking your dog to be excited about the alarm clock after you already got out of bed and then your alarm clock goes, your dog doesn't care about that anymore. So these are 3 types of classical conditioning techniques that frankly are ineffective, or they just are unreliable, or they just frankly don't work. So I believe that is everything. I know that was a long time. Hopefully that's everything you needed. If you have any more questions, let me know. Thursday and Friday I should be available during lunch and after school. For those of you who actually took the time to listen to this video, I do appreciate it greatly and deeply. For those other students that are in the class that maybe chose to never pay attention to this at all, did not heed my warning, and maybe even didn't do anything today at all while I'm gone, well, I guess we'll find out how prepared you are soon enough. So thanks so much for listening. Please check out these documents, and please be prepared to ask me any questions you may have, and then we'll go over the answers to the practice stuff on Thursday. Thank you.